Welcome back to our examination of the predators. I didn't expect to get back to these guys so soon, but it turns out the last video had some unanswered questions that are quite interesting. Because last time we looked at the biology of the predator and what it tells us about its ancestry. However, it can tell us much more than that. We determined that the predator is a, predator specialized in small endothermic prey, that is animals like rats, cats, rabbits, maybe small monkeys in Earth terms or whatever their equivalent on the predator homeworld is. However, the features of the predator can also tell us a lot of stuff about the homeworld itself, and quite surprising stuff, considering what the homeworld has been depicted like in the movies so far. One thing I have to address before I get to my examinations about the Predator homeworld is canonicity of one movie in particular, because the only time we saw the Predator homeworld on screen in an official movie was Alien vs. Predator Requiem, a movie nobody wants to acknowledge, but we probably have to, because it is the only depiction and it is technically canon. And I have to address this for a moment because the canonicity of the AVP movies is disputed. However, it was established as canon by the latest The Predator movie, which includes the alien spear weapon alien tail spear weapon from the original AVP movie. And I will go so far as to say that by extension that also means Alien vs. Predator Requiem is part of the canon, which is good for us because that's the only way we get any pictures of the movie. We get any pictures of the planet, even though fans will not really like this. How this works with Prometheus is, well, I think the Alien movies and the Predator movies are completely separate franchises. The Alien movies have their own canon, which is made up of Prometheus and the Alien movies. And the Predator movies are a separate world and universe where Prometheus did not happen, the Alien movies probably are not happening, and instead the Predator and Alien vs. Predator movies are happening. So this is the world of the Predators. It just happens to also have creatures in it that are very similar to xenomorphs. So that's how I explain that. Just because every other explanation, plain and simply, does not work. Okay, on to the topic at hand. What does the biology of the predator tell us about the predator home planet? And aside from what I already discussed in the earlier video, which I will link in the end of this video, there is one thing I haven't discussed there, and that's their vision. We get a main piece of evidence about that in the original 1987 Predator movie, in the scene where the Predator takes off its mask and looks at Major Schaefer, which is happening right now in the background, and you can see the moment the Predator takes off its mask, Dutch Schaefer becomes practically invisible. And there's a good reason for that. His body temperature is about on the same level as the background temperature in the Vietnamese jungle. So, because the predator mainly sees in infrared light, seeing the body warmth of its prey and the warmth of the surroundings, this means it can barely distinguish between a person and the jungle without the aid of the mask. And that tells us something about the predator, because that tells us this creature cannot have naturally occurred in a jungle environment. This is such a large disadvantage in such an environment that the species can never have naturally evolved there. It must have evolved in an environment where this is not an issue, where the temperatures never go beyond the body temperature of an animal, and where they can thus search for prey under any circumstance without them being completely blinded by the environmental temperatures. For reference, on Earth that would mean that they would only be able to live without technology in a range from the Arctic Circle south toward about New York and Washington State to draw a line. And then Europe, Siberia, Japan. Everything else would be off limits to them. On the other end of the world, of course, Antarctica would be viable, but barely anything else because there's just very little landmass on the southern hemisphere close to the Antarctic. So it does make sense we see them in the Antarctic in Alien vs. Predator, but it makes very little sense to see them in the Vietnamese jungle and otherwise in very warm environments. However, they seem to be most comfortable in warm environments, which is odd, but we'll get back to that. First of all, the environments where this creature could have evolved. Like I said, one option is the cold to temperate areas of their planet, if their planet has such. And the other option would be caves, because there it could be cold as well. Everything else is just too hot for them to be a viable creature of that area. They would just starve to death, at least in summer, and in many areas all year round. I suppose they could live up on the mountains, that could be cold enough too, but that's about it with their options. Now we don't see much of the Predator Homeworld, and I'm playing the clip right now in the background. This is all we see in Alien vs. Predator Requiem, and it tells us very, very little about the planet. It tells us it has 3 suns. It looks like kind of a desert environment, and other depictions have a jungle environment, but it's really not clear from the images. Really not at all. We can rule out the cave option, because the predators are just far too large for that. A predator living in a cave system would need to be able to squeeze into tight spots in the cave to pursue its prey, and this creature is just far too large to do that. So they are ground dwellers, not cave dwellers. Mountains, it's likely but unusual, because that would mean their range would be fairly limited, which is a really big problem when you want to become a civilization, when you want to develop technology, because they have a rather tight living space. So that leaves us with the Arctic environment idea, which is the most probable one. So they are probably a creature of the Arctic or moderate area of their planet. But all depictions of their home planet are very, very hot. But when we see them on Earth, they are in very hot climates. And there are a couple of possible explanations for that. The easiest one is that they seek out hot climates precisely because they are at a disadvantage. We know that predators are sporting hunters, and they might want to give their prey a sporting chance by giving them an environment where they are in a natural advantage. So that might be why they go to hot areas on Earth. Another option is that animals on the Predator Homeworld are just far warmer than animals on Earth. So the temperature difference between the environment and the creatures would be larger, and thus they would be easier to see in predator vision. However, that would also make it very easy for animals to become invisible to the predators. On purpose, just not on purpose, by evolution, in order to hide from them. And then there's a third option, and that one is interesting. We have to consider predator history. Looking at the predators, what's interesting is they are a technological species. They have spaceships. They can cross large gaps of space to get to Earth and other planets. And they need to have developed that technology at some point, which is the interesting thing, because that means they have to have had an industrial revolution of sorts. And considering they might be similar in their history to humans, or even just considering the possibility they might be, They've probably had a time in their history when they were facing global warming. So here is something that might have happened to them that resulted in the predators we have today. Predators have originally evolved on a rather cold planet. They were specialized hunters in a cold environment, hunting their prey with infrared vision by detecting their body warmth. As their civilization grew and their technology grew, they caused a global warming phenomenon. They failed to stop the global warming on their planet, and what happened is that the planet turned very warm and mainly dominated by a desert environment and a jungle environment instead of a tundra and moderate climate environment like before, or at least like in the areas where the predators originally lived. The predators then were able to adapt to that, however, not completely. Some parts of their body were so fundamentally linked to living in cold areas that they couldn't adapt biologically. That's why their vision is completely unable to work in warm environments. That's why they need their masks. Their masks have become a crutch for them to survive. Their bodies are now adapted to a very hot environment. They thrive in that, they survive in that, they are well in that. But their vision and probably some internal systems have not. And so they are completely dependent on technology to live on their own home planet. And that is the tragedy of Yautja Prime. And it's the only way I can make sense of their frankly bizarre biology.
Yautja
Prime!
So that's that. Next time we will be looking into Pokemon and how the existence of Pokeballs tells us what exactly Pokemon are and why they can do stuff that animals just can't do.